just enjoy the human race and not have to win it? It's kind of tough, isn't it? We live in a win at all costs sort of a world these days, don't we? Isn't that the message we get? Something we have to reframe, I think, which brings us to our topic for today, the fine art of reframing. You know, when Charles and Myrtle started this thing we call unity way back in the 1890s, they had no intention of starting another religious denomination. What Charles wanted to do was to offer ideas and practices that would be of benefit to anyone from any religious background or none at all. His dream was that unity would help Buddhists be better Buddhists and Christians be better Christians and so on. You get the idea there. Well, there's one little problem with making that a reality, because even today, after all these years, you may have noticed that in our unity books and our publications and at unity centers each week, you will still encounter traditional religious language. The language has more in common with Christianity than any of those other religions that Charles wanted to help people with. And I'm talking about words like God, Jesus, prayer, Christ. Those are the main ones. Those are the main ones that we hear over and over again. And these words are holdovers. They're holdovers from our Western Judeo-Christian culture. That's where unity comes from, is our common Western Judeo-Christian culture. These words have become embedded in the way that we think and speak. And sometimes I wonder if our continued use of these words might be keeping some people away who would otherwise resonate with our message. In fact, there's been this ongoing discussion at the national level in unity regarding just how Christian we are, or maybe more precisely, how Christian do we want to be. I try to keep my position clear and concise. I believe in truth in advertising. Truth in advertising. So, if we tell the world that we're Christian, 95% of the Christians from other denominations will examine what we teach, and they will conclude that we're a bunch of stinking liars. Because we don't believe in things like the virgin birth, atonement, salvation, the Trinity, and I can go on and on. Whatever traditional Christian language that we use in unity has been totally and completely reframed and redefined, and traditional Christians will hear those definitions and they'll say, that's not Christianity. You're a bunch of stinking liars, right? So that's a bit of a problem. But there's another side to the question. Another side to the question of whether unity should have a more blatant Christian identity. What about people who have left traditional Christian churches or who have never been associated with the church at all? They're looking for a spiritual community. Maybe they might write us off because of some of the words that we use. Superficially, it makes us sound like the same old-time religion. And they hear those words and they'll say, why do I want to go there? Just like every other traditional Christian church in town that uses those same words. So it's a bit of a conundrum. It really is, but it's one that I think we're going to have to find some way to learn to live with. People who are looking for that more traditional expression of Christianity, they have plenty of places to go. They have plenty of options out there. There are churches up and down the street that still use those same definitions. And they have a right to go there in the same way that we have every right in the world to redefine and reframe words like Jesus, God, prayer, Christ. And for those people who are tired of the same old-time religion, well, if they stick around long enough, if they give us a chance, they're going to find a completely new way to be spiritual, but not religious, despite a few traditional words that stick around. There's an author that I've talked about a lot, somebody who really helped me make the transition to that next evolutionary step in our spiritual development. Bishop John Shelby Spong, he once described unity as a bridge from traditional religion to the next step in our spiritual evolution. There he is up there. By the way, for those of you who follow him, about a month ago he had a stroke. I understand that he's doing better. He's recovering. He's still writing. His blog every week is up, but that's something just to keep in mind and keep our intentions for his recovery. I still think he has a lot to offer the world. People, he described unity as a bridge, though. He said unity is a bridge from traditional religion to our next step in our spiritual evolution. He said that at a conference Karen and I attended a few years back. And I think that's a great observation because people need a bridge. People need a bridge. Not everyone is able to make that giant leap, to leap over that chasm that separates traditional religion over here and the next evolutionary step over here. And for some folks, it's a giant, scary chasm, almost like a canyon, because there can be this combination of guilt, fear, shame even, that can accompany the process of letting go of religion, daring to consider something new. And that can come from all different directions. People going through this process of change, going to the next evolutionary step, they may have family, they may have friends, and even acquaintances and co-workers who, if they hear about it, they disapprove, right? There's a loss of community that can happen. All of those things are disconcerting. Well, we can help. It's part of our mission. That's our mission here, is to help people of all ages and faiths to thrive in the midst of change, especially change like that. We give people permission to reframe the old words. In fact, we do more than just give permission. We actively encourage people to redefine, to reframe, and we offer some examples how to do that. Now again, I mentioned Bishop John Shelby Spong up there, and you saw a couple of his books. You want to talk about reframing and redefining, you get a book that says Why Christianity Must Change or Die, or Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism. I mean, he's talking about making some big changes, some serious reframing going on in his books. He's a great example of how to do that. And just this last April, in one of his articles that he published online, he made this observation. He said, over the years of human history, every human definition of God has finally died or been radically revised in the light of new knowledge and expanded human experience. So, in my mind, there is a reality to God that transcends every definition. That's the kind of radical revision that I mean when I use that word reframing. Many people still use the word God, but they mean something entirely different. Or they want it to mean something entirely different, but it still might be tied to something that's embedded from the past. The problem is that the old words, the old definitions, they get developed in childhood. And often what happens is they get lodged in the subconscious. Remember last week we talked about the movie Inside Out. It's about all of the things that go on in the mind of a 10-year-old girl. And they had this metaphor for the subconscious. It's this huge locked and barred door deep, deep down in this dark cave. And one of the characters points to the door and says, that's the subconscious. That's the place where they put all the troublemakers. Our old embedded theology, the old definitions that we associate with these words, those are some of the troublemakers that get locked away in the subconscious. They're locked up, but they're still there. And that's one of the reasons why people who are ready, they're ready to take the next evolutionary step, but they experience some anxiety, some discomfort. So they cling to the old language for a sense of comfort, to relieve that anxiety. There's a classic unity book called Lessons in Truth by Emily Cady. And she calls this kind of anxiety reaction, she calls it chemicalization. Have any of you read that book? You heard about chemicalization? That's the terminology that she uses. And it's really a metaphor. It's a metaphor for what can happen when you combine two incompatible chemicals. Sometimes it blows up, right? Causes some unpleasant reactions. The old embedded ideas collide with something new and different, and they cause physical discomfort, anxiety, distress. I think the modern way of describing that is cognitive dissonance. We've heard of that, cognitive dissonance. So the best way to relieve the discomfort is to try to find some way to reconcile the old and the new, because just ignoring it isn't going to make it go away. If the old stuff is still around, maybe we should try to keep it. The best way to let go of it is to keep it. Redefine it. Reframe it. This is one of those places where I think we can have it both ways. I think we get to have our cake and eat it too. For me, this is one of the most liberating aspects of our unity teachings. We reserve the right to reframe and redefine the old words consistent with what we now know about the world. Banning language, banning ideas, forbidding their use, that's never worked. We've tried it. The world has tried it many times, and it just doesn't work. In fact, this last week was Banned Books Week. Banned Books Week. It was sponsored by the American Library Association, celebrating freedom to read, freedom to think, and things like that. Did you know at one time that the book Charlotte's Web, that wonderful, wonderful story of a talking spider and a pig and the little girl, was banned because there was something considered to be demonic or occult about talking animals? Wow. Despite the fact that there's a couple of them in the Bible. I don't understand these things. Some of the books that have been banned, it'll blow your mind at different places in the United States. But anyway, Banned Books Week ended on Friday, and Friday happened to be International Blasphemy Rights Day. Did you know there was such a thing? International Blasphemy Rights Day, defending your right to blaspheme and be a heretic. In other words, freedom of speech, right? What we're doing here today, right now, at one time would have been called blasphemy. There were thought police in the world who would round you up and do terrible things to you if you dared to think and express the wrong thought, the thought that was not approved of by the authorities. Anything that departed from the officially authorized ideas and definitions, especially when it came to religion, was blasphemy and heresy. Book banning, book burning, declaring something to be blasphemy are all ways of taking away our freedom. And traditional religion has done all three of those things to great excess for centuries now. We want unity to be a path of liberation. We still need that. We still need that. Otherwise, there wouldn't be the need for an International Blasphemy Rights Day. There are still countries in the world that have laws on the books that make it a crime, punishable by some terrible things, to say, even to criticize a religion in those countries. So, if we're going to be a path to liberation, we really have to be actively focused on redefining and reframing our words and concepts instead of trying to ban them or shame people for using them. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to start calling a circle a square. Doesn't mean we're going to claim that Jesus is the new name for Buddha. Oh, Jesus and Buddha, they taught exactly the same thing. Baloney. We're not going to get silly like that. And I mentioned 4 words earlier that we really need to focus on reframing. And those words are God, Jesus, prayer, and Christ. Now, getting back to what Bishop Spong was talking about earlier, when it comes to the word God, well, there's a theologian named Gene Marshall who invites us to ask a really interesting question when it comes to the word God. He invites us to ask this: what reality are we pointing to when we use the word God? It's an interesting question. That's a simple and elegant question. We ask the question, and then we have to take some time to contemplate. I mean, this isn't something that we just kind of, oh, well, we think about it for a couple of seconds and go on about our lives. We ask the question, and then we take some time to contemplate and to think about it. In fact, this is a great subject for a form of focused kind of meditation. Actually, take 20 minutes to sit with this and to focus on the question. And when we get through with it, take some time to write about it. Journaling is a great way to capture anything that might come up during the time of meditation. What reality are we pointing to? Do we even know what that is? Do we even know what it is that goes on in our mind when we use that word? So try that. Work with it. And I'm not sure if Albert Einstein actually tried this practice. Probably not. But he wrote something which for me gives us a really, really good example of a beautifully reframed concept of God that could have very easily been based on the question, what reality are we pointing to when we use the word God? Here's what he said. He said, it seems to me that the idea of a personal God is an anthropological concept which I cannot take seriously. My views are near those of Spinoza, Baruch Spinoza, philosopher. Admiration for the beauty of and belief in the logical simplicity of the order which we can grasp humbly and only imperfectly. I believe that we have to content ourselves with our imperfect knowledge and understanding and treat values and moral obligations as a purely human problem. The most important of all human problems. That's beautiful. That's well defined. That's reframing. And then we have the words Jesus and Christ. And from traditional religion, we get the idea that Christ is Jesus' last name, right? Christ is Jesus' last name. Well, they're really meant to be used separately. They're two different things. Jesus is the name of the person, the human being. Christ is the word that people use to describe his essence. The word Christ literally means anointed one, as in someone who was anointed with oil, because people in ancient times, they would anoint someone with oil because they believed them to be a leader. They believed that they had special qualities that they were going to use to lead and to serve and to teach. So that's what they saw. That's what they saw in Jesus. Traditionally, we use the word Christ to designate Jesus as someone who should be put up on a pedestal and worshipped, when in fact, the word really means that he had human qualities, he had skills, he had powers and abilities to lead, to serve, to teach, and to be an example to others. So, we're supposed to emulate him, not worship him. So the word Christ really invites us to look for those qualities, both within ourselves and others. In fact, that's going to be the focus of our 7-week fall series that we're going to be starting next week. Learning to discern all of the components that go into making up what we call the Christ, or Christ consciousness. And it's something that we all have. Remember that song we did a little bit earlier? It's in every one of us. That's what we mean, that Christ consciousness and all that goes into us is in every one of us. And finally, we come to the word prayer. Now, for this one, I'm going to go straight to the source, the writings of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who did a reframe on this word all those years ago that is still spot on today, and yet I still hear people using the word prayer in a way that is quite the opposite of the way Charles and Myrtle define the word. So let's start with Charles. Here's what he said. He said, understanding shows that prayer is more than asking God for help in this physical world. Actually, we have become a human race of praying beggars. Prayer is not supplication or begging. It is more than supplication. Supplication is impotent. Do not supplicate or beg God to give you what you need. Prayer is a simple asking for that which we know is waiting for us and an affirmation of its existence. Charles had a way with words, didn't he? In fact, a human race of praying beggars, that sounds like something Mark Twain would have said. And he may have been influenced by Twain because they were contemporaries after all. But, and in the interest of being fair and balanced now, we want to get to what Myrtle had to say about prayer. Here's her reframe. She says, prayers aren't sent out at all. Sometimes that is our trouble. Where would we send our prayers? We should direct them to our minds and hearts and affairs. We commune with God mind within our own consciousness. Prayer is an exercise to change our thought habits and our living habits, that we may set up a new and better activity in accord with the divine law, rather than with the suggestions we have received from various sources. That's another reframe. What is that divine law she talks about? Well, takes us back to our first question, doesn't it? What reality are we pointing to when we use the word God? And so the process comes full circle. We start with something that feeds the entire process. Unity spirituality means that we get to engage the process. We get to actively engage the process because we're free to do so by right of consciousness. And we really do value that freedom here. So next week we launch into our fall series. The color is purple. That might be a little bit challenging for me. But royal purple, we'll see how everyone shows up, and let's come together and start the fall off right. See you then.